If you're in the market for a car, you probably ask yourself, should I buy or lease? But more importantly, what's the smartest option that gives you the biggest bang for your buck? You already know car dealers don't have your best interest at heart and will push for the option that makes them the most commission. But what's actually the most cost-effective option for you? After crunching the numbers using current market data in 2025, I was surprised by which one came out on top, and I'm going to break it all down for you. In this video, we're going to walk through the 3 options to get a car, figure out which option is the cheapest, and go over some key things you'll want to consider before making a decision. So let's get started. 3 options when getting a car. When you're buying a car at a dealership, you're usually given 3 options. Option 1 is cash. The first way is to buy the car outright in cash. This means no monthly payments, no interest, and total ownership from day 1. But let's be real, this isn't always realistic for most people. So for today's comparison, we're going to treat this as the baseline or status quo to see how the other options stack up. Option 2, finance. The second option is to finance the car. You make a down payment based on how much you've saved and then borrow the rest. The car is yours to keep and you could drive it and customize it and do whatever you want with it. However, the catch is that you'll be making monthly payments and you'll pay interest on the borrowed amount. The key consideration here is the interest rate on the cost of borrowing, but we'll cover this in more detail later in the video. And the third option is to lease. Leasing is basically renting the car for a set period, usually 3 to 5 years. You won't own the car at the end, but you get the flexibility. You can switch into a newer model and you don't have to worry about the resale value later on. That said, it's not really your car, so there are limitations on mileage, modifications, and what kind of wear and tear is acceptable. Now that you understand your options, let's jump into the numbers and figure out which one is actually the most cost effective for you. What is the cheapest option? So let's say you are in the market for the 2025 Kia Sportage, which costs $37,549.69 after taxes and fees. Here are the assumptions that we are going to make for the calculations, which are actual terms taken from Kia's website. We're looking at a 5-year period or 60 months where you drive 20,000 kilometers per year. So 100,000 kilometers at the end of 5 years, you'll be making monthly payments using current interest rates of 2.99% for financing and 5.74% for leasing. We'll go over 2 scenarios. Scenario 1 is that you put down no deposit, and scenario 2 is you put down a deposit of $5,000. And in each scenario, we will compare the cheapest option across buying it outright in cash, financing, and leasing. We'll also compare the impact that a deposit makes and if it's worth it. Before we jump into the calculations, I just want to do some housekeeping here. So as you can see, this is a template that I've come up with to compare the 2 scenarios, which we'll be going over. Scenario 1 being putting down no deposit, and scenario 2 being putting down a deposit of $5,000. And we will be comparing each scenario across 3 different options, which is buying it outright in cash, financing, and leasing. If you want access to this particular template that we'll be going into more detail, make sure to check out the description box down below. And if you get access to this template and you want to make your own edits, all you have to do is go to File and make a copy, or even go to download an Excel so that you can update it however you like. Another thing to note is that the cells are colored. You can see that if it's in green, that you would need to manually update it. And then if it's automatic, it means that there are formulas that it will automatically do the calculations for you. The first step is to first input all the assumptions that we will be using for the calculations. So I'll go by step. The first cell to update is the term. So let's say that you have a time horizon of 5 years, which equates to 60 months, as well as put down an estimate of how much you plan to use the car. So in this case, I put down 20,000 kilometers or miles, depending on wherever you are. Now, the next cell to update is the price of the car, the MSRP. And the car that I chose for this particular example is the 2025 Sportage, because this is a very popular car. A lot of families get it. So I thought it would be the perfect example. And when you scroll down, a lot of the dealerships provide this sort of information on their websites where you can play around with the different numbers. So first, what we're going to do is start off with cash, and we're going to be inputting these amounts in our template. Just so it's easier to see, I will put them side by side for comparison. So you can see that the MSRP is $30,695, which I've inputted here. Now there are a bunch of fees and taxes associated with buying a car. So that's not all you're paying. You're also paying, various fees such as delivery and destination charge, dealer charges. I've just added all those fees up in this particular cell. So this totals to $2,831.50. Now there's also another component of taxes, and taxes itself, when you add these two amounts up, depending on where you're purchasing your car, here in BC, you pay PST and GST. And when you add those two amounts up, the total is $4,023.19. But basically, once you add these three amounts up, which is $37,549, that amount matches pretty much to the total here. That's your quick check. Now, moving on to the financing. So financing is a loan. We want to make sure that we update this based on our key assumptions. So the term is going to be 60 months and the payment frequency here is on a monthly basis. And based on these inputs, we're going to be updating the cells over here. So you can see that, first of all, the PPSA fee is $106.50. So this is a charge that's only applicable for loans and leases. It's not a fee when you pay it in cash. So I've just added a separate fee just for the leasing and loans. You'll see that based on the term of 60 months, the interest rate is 2.99%, which I've updated over here, where the finance interest rate is 2.99%. Now, if you play around with the terms, you can see that the rates decrease, or if it's for a longer period of time, the rate increases. So keep that in mind. For us, we're going to go with the standard 5 years, which is 60 months, which offers a 2.99% interest rate. Everything else is similar, but when you scroll down, what you can see is the monthly payment amount. And in this case, it's $676.69, which I put over here. So this is only if you put down no deposit. If we were to go back and let's say we put in a deposit of $5,000, you will see that the monthly payment has decreased to $586.87. Now let's go over our last option, which is leasing. And we could start off with the down payment. With the down payment of $5,000 and yearly mileage of 20,000 kilometers on a 16-month term, where the payment frequency is monthly, the interest rate here is 5.79%. So I went ahead and made sure that I updated the interest rate for the lease here as 5.79%. You can see that there's also a PPSA fee of $106.50. So this is in line with financing. And this is not a huge amount, but I just try to keep it as close to these numbers as possible. And when you scroll down, you can see that the monthly lease payment here is $371.77. And I've updated that under the deposit here of $5,000 and the lease as $371.77. Now, where do I get that number from? All you have to do, remove the deposit, and you can see that the monthly lease amount has increased to $467.48, which I've inputted over here. Now, another important component of a lease that we've noted down is the end value. So as you can see, the end value after 5 years would be $17,684.35, which I've inputted over here as a lease end value. So that's all the information that we're obtaining from the car dealership's website. Two additional informations that we're going to need for this calculation is, first, the resale value of the car in 5 years after 100,000 kilometers. So what I did here is look for a comparable car. Let's say 5 years ago, which is in 2020, you were buying a Kia Sportage that has 100,000 kilometers on it. What would be the resale value? So I did some quick research on Auto Trader and I looked at cars that are from 2020 and that have a mileage between 95,000 kilometers and 105,000 kilometers. So that would be our range. And you can see there's a range of prices around 19,300. There's even almost 24,000. So there is quite a big of a range, and some are below market, some are above market. So I took a look through and came out with an average or something that would be at market. So you can see this is below market. Others are fair price where it's above market. So I thought between these two amounts, about 21,000 of resale value is reasonable. So I took that number and I put it as the resale value over here. Now, the last piece of information that we need to update this template with is the current GIC interest rate. rate. GIC being a relatively safe investment. Or another way to look at this is what's your current rate of return if you were to invest your money. So all I did was I looked at RateHub for the best GIC rates, and I saw that EQ Bank was offering 3.55%. And so I took that number and I ran with it. Obviously, there's a lot of assumptions that this is going to be maintained over the next 5 years. Actually, there's a higher rate for 5 years. There's 3.8%. But, conservatively, let's go with a slightly lower number and stick with 3.55%. So that is where I'm getting that number from. Now, the rest of the calculations will be done automatically, and we can jump into scenario 1. So scenario 1, just to revisit, is putting down no deposit. And all the numbers are being pulled from the summary tab where we had just input all the assumptions. And when you look at the numbers, the total price of the car is slightly higher by $100 under financing and lease just because of that PPSA fee. That is not a significant amount. Now, when it comes to monthly payments, it's obviously zero under cash, and then under financing is $676 and lease is $467. Cost of borrowing is 0% because you paid in cash. It's 2.99% under finance and then 5.79% under lease. And the total interest paid over the term is $2,900 versus $8,000 under the lease. And the investment rate of return, which is the GIC we just talked about, is 3.55%. So in this case, if you paid your car in cash, then you're missing out on $7,280 of investment returns. When it comes to financing and leasing, there is no opportunity cost because you're borrowing the money. Now, when it comes to resale value, it will be $21,000 under cash option and finance option because you ultimately own it. Under the lease, you have to give the car back. So you don't have an option to sell the vehicle unless you do some sort of arrangement with your dealership to do so. Now, when we look at strictly just the direct costs associated with cash, it shows up to be the lowest at $16,500. And the second best option would be financing with $19,600 and the most expensive under the lease of $28,000. Now, we could take this one step further and also consider what the opportunity cost is if we were to invest that cash. So if you were to add up these two amounts, then you can see that the opportunity cost is actually much higher at $23,800 versus financing doesn't change and leasing doesn't change. And this completely switches the order where the cheapest option here is financing, then cash, then leasing. So leasing still becomes the most expensive. Now you might argue, what if I plan to buy out the car at the end of the lease? Does that make lease still more expensive? So how you would calculate that is you would calculate the total lease payments, which is $28,000. You would add the residual value, which is the amount that you would buy out the lease for at the end of 5 years. And now at that point, since it's your car, since you bought out the lease, then you could resell it at the resale value. And in that case, the cost does come down a little bit. The difference is about $3,000. But as you can see in the grand scheme of things, it is still the more expensive option. So if you know you're going to own the car at the end of the 5 years, then it's much better to go with the financing over the lease since you pay the higher interest rate at that point. Takeaways from scenario 1 of no down payment. In this specific example, based on the assumptions used, buying the car outright in cash initially appears to be the cheapest option when looking at direct costs alone. However, once we factor in opportunity costs, like what that cash could earn you in a GIC at 3.55%, the picture changes. Since the cost of borrowing at 2.99% is lower than the potential return of 3.55%, financing actually comes out cheaper in this case. This really depends on whether you're able to lock in a low financing rate, often available through special dealership promotions or favorable borrowing rates from your bank. On the flip side, if you're not eligible for a low rate and borrowing costs are higher, paying in cash becomes a cheaper option. But let's say that you can't pay the full amount in cash. What if you put down a partial deposit instead? That's what we're going to look at next. Moving on to scenario 2, which is putting down a deposit. The amount that we chose is $5,000. We start off with the same total price. The monthly payments change slightly, and this is all pulling from the summary tab, which we've updated. The cost of borrowing doesn't change, and the interest rates have changed. And if you were to compare to scenario 1, you can see that there are changes to the interest paid. Obviously, the interest paid will go down in both scenarios because you put down a deposit, so you're paying less interest on money borrowed. Now, the flip side, something that you need to consider is the opportunity cost of putting down the deposit of $5,000. So if you didn't put it towards a car but instead invested it, then over 5 years, you could have earned almost $970. And obviously, when it comes to cash, the numbers stay the same as scenario one. Now, when we only consider the direct cost, we can see that the order hasn't changed. Cash appears to be the cheapest, then financing, then leasing. But when you incorporate the opportunity cost, the order completely changes, where the cheapest option is financing, then cash, then leasing. Now, full circle, let's look at the summary page. So you can see that there is a neat little summary here that's pulling in from scenario one and scenario two, and it's a cost that includes the opportunity cost. So cash stays the same. There's no difference between scenario one and scenario two. For financing, it actually becomes more expensive when you put down a deposit, just because the cost of borrowing is actually lower than the rate of return that you could get. The cost of borrowing being 2.99% versus the opportunity cost being 3.55%. So it's actually a higher cost if you put down a deposit. And for leasing, when you put down a deposit, you're actually worse off by a nominal $227. While you save on interest, it's not enough to cover the opportunity cost based on the structure of the lease formula. To make it worthwhile, you would need to put down a bigger deposit. So that is the outcome. And in this case, you can see that the cheapest option is to finance with no deposit. And if you want access to this template so you can play around with the numbers and see which option is best for you, make sure to check out the description box down below. Takeaways from scenario two with a $5,000 deposit. In this version, where we apply a $5,000 deposit across all options, financing still ends up being the cheaper option when we account for opportunity costs. What's interesting is how the costs have shifted. The cost of financing increases slightly because you're giving up $5,000 that could have earned 3.55% in a GIC. Even though a $5,000 deposit cuts your monthly lease payment, it only reduces your total lease interest by $743 over 5 years based on the structure of the leasing formula, while tying up that $5,000 costs you $970 in foregone GIC interest. As a result, the net economic cost is nominal between putting down no deposit versus a $5,000 deposit, with the difference being only $230. In this case, you're better off putting down no deposit. This just goes to show how important it is to understand the assumptions behind each scenario. Even with small changes in interest rates or investment returns can significantly impact which option is truly the cheapest for you. So what's the cheapest option? As we just walk through the calculations, it really comes down to three main factors. The first is being the current cost of borrowing versus the rate of return on investments. Two is how much money you're willing to put down as a deposit. And three is the future resale value of the car. So play around with these three factors to see if a change in interest rate, deposit, and resale value impacts the final cost to determine the cheapest option for you. And if you want access to this template, make sure to check out the description box down below. Other key considerations. Now that we've gone over the numbers, let's talk about a few other important factors that could affect your decision beyond just the cost of getting the car. Buying outright in cash. Let's start with buying a car outright in cash. The biggest pro here is peace of mind. You own the car 100% and there are no monthly payments to worry about, and you don't pay any interest. It's yours, just plain and simple. But the downside is that a car is a depreciating asset. As soon as you drive it off the lot, the value drops. Plus, you need to have a big chunk of savings ready to go. And even if you do, there's the opportunity cost of locking up that money into a car instead of putting it towards something that grows in value. So while it's straightforward, it might not be the most efficient way to use your cash. Financing. Next, let's talk about financing. The main advantage here is that you get to own the car while using other people's money. So usually the banks or the dealership, if they are having a special promotion. If you can secure a low interest rate, this can actually be a smart way to buy a car without draining your savings. And another perk is because the car is technically yours, you have the freedom to do whatever you want. You can add a roof rack, get it detailed however you like, take a long road trip. There are no restrictions. But the con is that financing usually means higher monthly payments compared to leasing. It only works out cheaper in the long run if the car holds its resale value and you plan on keeping it for a while. Leasing. And lastly, leasing. The pro of leasing is that you get a lot of flexibility. You can upgrade to a new car every few years without having to go through the hassle of selling your old one. And if you're someone who gets bored of your car easily or likes the idea of always driving something new, this might also appeal to you. So essentially, you're paying for the convenience and for options. But there are some catches. Leases usually come with mileage limits, restrictions on modifications, and rules around repairs. You're also not building any equity in the car, so if the car ends up holding its value well, leasing ends up being the more expensive option. So depending on what matters most to you, flexibility, ownership, upfront costs, it's important to weigh all these factors before deciding. There's no one size fits all answer here. It really comes down to what works best for you, your lifestyle, and your budget. You also have to consider other costs associated with having a vehicle. Consider the following costs: car insurance of $150 per month, gas of $300 per month, parking of about $25, and routine maintenance of about $25. And these total minimum other costs add up to $500. And that's aside from the cost of getting the car. Having access to a car is convenient and sometimes a necessity, but make sure you're considering all the costs involved so you're not underwater. And if you want to have access to the template used today, make sure to check out the description box down below. Thank you so much for watching today, and I'll see you guys in my next video over here on how to determine how much car you can actually afford.